Marcus Chen worked 16-hour days for 11 years and never broke $35,000 a year. Let that sink in for a moment. 16 hours, every single day. And at the end of each year, after taxes, after expenses, after everything, he was barely scraping by. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't lack of dedication. Marcus was one of the hardest working people you'd ever meet, and he was trapped. The question isn't whether hard work matters. Of course it does. The question is, why does hard work sometimes lead to prosperity and other times lead absolutely nowhere? Why do some people grind themselves into dust and stay poor, while others seem to work less and accumulate more? That's what this story is about. And if you've ever felt like you're running full speed on a treadmill going nowhere, you need to hear what Marcus discovered. At 34, Marcus owned a small organic farm just outside Des Moines, Iowa, 40 acres of heirloom tomatoes, leafy greens, and more debt than he cared to calculate. He'd bought the land with his wife Sarah when they were 26, full of dreams about sustainable agriculture and building something meaningful. They'd read all the books, they believed in the work, they believed that if you put in the hours, if you did things right, if you cared enough, success would follow. And Marcus cared. He cared so much it was killing him. Every morning started at 4:30 a.m. Check the irrigation systems, walk the fields, monitor for pests. By 6 a.m. he was harvesting whatever needed to go to market that day. By 8 a.m. he was loading the truck. By 10 a.m. he was at the farmer's market, standing behind his table, smiling at customers, explaining the difference between Cherokee Purple and Brandywine tomatoes to people who mostly just wanted to know which one was cheaper. He'd stay at the market until 2 p.m., then drive back to the farm, unload, water, weed, fix whatever broke that day, and something always broke. The tractor, the greenhouse ventilation, the fence where deer got through. Dinner was usually eaten standing up at 8 p.m., something Sarah left in the microwave, then back out to the fields until he literally couldn't see anymore. 16 hours, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 during peak season. And at the end of each month, after paying suppliers, equipment costs, water, seeds, labor for the 2 part-time workers he couldn't actually afford but desperately needed, there was almost nothing left. Some months, there was actually less than nothing. Sarah worked full-time as a nurse just to keep their health insurance and cover the mortgage on their house. The farm wasn't supporting them. They were supporting the farm. Marcus kept telling himself it would get better. Next season, next year, once we build the customer base, once we get more efficient, But it never did. Year 3 looked like year 1. Year 7 looked like year 4. By year 11, Marcus wasn't building a dream anymore. He was just surviving, barely. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late September when Marcus found himself standing in the barn at 4 a.m., hands shaking, unable to remember if he'd eaten dinner the night before. He'd come out to check on the irrigation pump that had been making a weird noise, but now he couldn't remember why he was there. His mind was just blank. Empty, used up. He sat down on an overturned bucket in the dark and started crying. Not the kind of crying where you feel better after, the kind where you realize something is profoundly broken and you don't know how to fix it. Sarah found him there 20 minutes later. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down next to him on the dirt floor. Finally, she spoke. "We can't keep doing this." "I know," Marcus said. "I just don't know what else to do. This is what farming is. This is what it takes." "Maybe," Sarah said quietly. "Or maybe we're doing it wrong." That sentence hung in the air between them. Doing it wrong. The words felt like betrayal somehow, like admitting defeat. But they also felt true. They were working harder than anyone they knew, and they were failing. Something wasn't adding up. Marcus took 3 days off. First time in 11 years he'd taken more than a single day. He slept. He sat on the porch. He tried to think clearly for the first time in years, and he realized he had no idea what he was actually doing wrong. He was doing everything the farming books said to do. He was following all the advice. He was working harder than humanly sustainable. And that was the problem, wasn't it? The amount of work required was literally not sustainable. But he didn't know any other way. The man who changed everything was named Robert Sullivan, and Marcus met him at the farmer's market 2 weeks after his breakdown. Robert wasn't a farmer. He was a customer, maybe 60 years old, silver hair, expensive-looking casual clothes. He'd been coming to Marcus's stand for a few months, always buying way more than seemed normal for one person. This particular Saturday, Robert showed up near closing time when most of the other vendors had already packed up. He looked at Marcus for a long moment, then said something that seemed completely out of nowhere. "You look exhausted." Marcus laughed, but it came out bitter. "Farming will do that." "No," Robert said. "Bad farming will do that. Good farming shouldn't." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He was about to say something defensive, but Robert held up his hand. "I'm not criticizing your produce. Your tomatoes are the best I've ever tasted. I'm criticizing your business model." "You don't know anything about my business model," Marcus said. "I know you're here every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. selling $300 worth of vegetables. I know you spent probably 6 hours this morning harvesting and another hour driving here. That's 7 hours for $300, about $40 an hour, except that doesn't count the months of growing time, the water, the seeds, the equipment. You're probably netting about $8 an hour, and that's before accounting for your own labor. Am I close?" Marcus stared at him. "Who are you?" "Someone who used to make the same mistake you're making. Different industry, same problem." Robert pulled out a business card. "I'm a business consultant now, mostly retired. I don't normally do this, but buy me a coffee and I'll tell you what I see. No charge. You can tell me to go to hell after if you want." Marcus almost said no. Pride, maybe. Exhaustion, definitely. But something in Robert's face wasn't condescending. It was sympathetic, like he actually understood. They went to the coffee shop 3 blocks down. Robert called it the leverage ladder, and he drew it out on a napkin at the coffee shop that Saturday afternoon. "There are 4 rungs," he said, drawing lines as he talked. "Most people spend their entire lives on the first rung and wonder why they can't climb. You're on the first rung right now." Marcus looked at the napkin. 4 horizontal lines, labeled 1 through 4. "Rung 1 is selling your time," Robert said. "You work, you get paid. You stop working, you stop getting paid. This is what 90% of people do. Employees, freelancers, small business owners who are really just self-employed. The problem with rung 1 is that time is finite. You only have so many hours. You can work harder, work longer, but there's a ceiling. And that ceiling," he tapped the napkin, "is usually right around where you are now. Survival mode. Not poverty, not prosperity. Just stuck." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. That was exactly where he was. Stuck. "Rung 2 is selling your systems," Robert continued. "This is where you stop doing all the work yourself and build processes that other people can execute. You're not trading time for money anymore. You're trading management for money. Most successful small businesses are here. The owner works less, but they've built something that runs partially without them. Rung 3 is selling your products at scale. This is where you've automated or systematized so thoroughly that your direct involvement is minimal. You've built something that generates value without requiring your constant pita. Reasons could be physical products, digital products, licensing, whatever. The key is scale without equivalent time increase. Rung 4 is selling your assets. This is where your money makes money. Investments, real estate, equity in businesses you don't operate. Pure leverage. Your capital works instead of you working." Marcus stared at the napkin. "I'm selling my time." "Exclusively," Robert said. "Every dollar you make requires you to physically be there doing the work, which means you're trapped. It doesn't matter how good your tomatoes are. It doesn't matter how hard you work. You can't scale time. So what am I supposed to do? I can't just suddenly stop farming." "You don't stop farming. You stop being the only farmer. You climbed to rung 2. Robert leaned back. Here's what I see when I look at your operation. You've got great products. You've clearly got the knowledge. What you don't have is leverage. You're doing everything yourself because you think that's what dedication looks like. But dedication without strategy is just exhaustion. Marcus felt defensive again, but Robert kept going. The question you need to ask isn't, how do I work harder? You've maxed that out. The question is, how do I make this work without me? Because right now, you are the single point of failure. You get sick, the farm fails. You burn out, the farm fails. You're not building a business. You're building a very expensive job. The words hit like a punch. Marcus had never thought about it that way, but it was completely true. If he disappeared tomorrow, the whole thing collapsed. That wasn't a business. That was dependency. Okay, Marcus said slowly. Say you're right. Say I need to move to rung 2. What does that actually look like? I can't afford to hire people. I'm already underwater. Robert smiled. That's the scarcity thinking that keeps you on rung 1. You can't afford not to hire people. You're working 16-hour days for poverty wages. You're already paying. You're paying with your health, your marriage, your life. You're just not paying cash. He pulled out a pen and flipped the napkin over. Here's the framework. 3 shifts you need to make, and you make them in order. Shift 1. Identify your highest value activities. What are you doing that actually generates revenue and that only you can do with your specific expertise? For you, that's probably crop planning, quality control, customer relationship building, maybe some specialized growing techniques. Write those down. Marcus thought. Okay, crop rotation planning, soil management, variety selection, talking to chefs and restaurants about custom growing. Good. Everything else, and I mean everything, is a candidate for delegation. Not immediately, but eventually. Shift 2 is systematizing those delegatable tasks. You need to document how you do things so thoroughly that someone with basic training could follow the process. Harvesting protocols, planting schedules, pest management decision trees. You turn your knowledge into systems. That sounds like it takes forever, Marcus said. It takes time you think you don't have. But here's the truth. You're going to spend that time anyway. You're spending it every single day reteaching yourself the same tasks because you never wrote them down. You're spending it doing C-level work that someone else could do for $12 an hour, while you could be doing A-level work that generates $50 an hour in value. You're not saving time by doing everything yourself. You're wasting it. Marcus felt something shift in his thinking. He'd always viewed his knowledge as something to protect, to keep doing himself. But Robert was right. He was just repeating the same tasks infinitely. Shift 3 is gradual delegation and revenue reinvestment, Robert continued. You start small. Maybe you hire someone part-time to handle harvest and market sales. That frees up 8 hours a week. What could you do with 8 free hours that would grow the business? Maybe you reach out to restaurants. Maybe you develop a CSA subscription model. Maybe you create value-added products, canned sauces, dried herbs, whatever. The point is, you use the freed time to climb the ladder, not to rest. But I'd have to pay someone. Yes, that's called investment. Right now, you're making poverty wages for expert-level work. If you pay someone else poverty wages to do beginner-level work, you break even on cost, but you gain time. And time spent on high-leverage activities multiplies value. That's the ladder. Robert stood up, leaving the napkin on the table. Look, you're going to do what you're going to do, but I've watched 100 people like you work themselves to death because they confused effort with effectiveness. The hardest workers don't stay poor because they're not working hard enough. They stay poor because they're playing the wrong game entirely. They're optimizing for effort instead of leverage. He put on his jacket. You've got good instincts. You've built something real. But if you don't change the model, you'll be having this same conversation in another 11 years, except you'll be too broken to recover. Your choice. And then he left. Marcus sat there for an hour, staring at that napkin. Marcus started small, because that's all he could manage without completely losing his mind. The first thing he did was spend 2 weeks documenting everything. Every single task he did on the farm, he wrote down in obsessive detail: how to check the irrigation, how to identify when tomatoes were ready for harvest, how to prep for market, how to handle customer questions. It felt ridiculous at first. He was spending time writing about work instead of doing work. But something happened as he documented. He started seeing patterns. He was doing the same 30 tasks over and over in loops. And most of them weren't complex. They were just tasks, necessary, but not expert level. He calculated that about 60% of his time was spent on things that literally anyone could do with a checklist and 1 day of training. That hurt to realize. He'd been wearing his exhaustion like a badge of honor, but most of what exhausted him was just repetitive manual labor. Necessary, but not special. The second D thing he did was reach out to a local high school agriculture program. He offered to take on one student as an intern, 10 hours a week, minimum wage. The kid's name was Jake, 17, grew up on a farm, actually knew which end of a hoe to hold. Marcus spent the first week training Jake using his documentation, and Jake picked it up immediately. Within 2 weeks, Jake was handling the entire harvest process for 3 of the crops. Not perfectly, but adequately. More than adequately, actually. That freed up about 12 hours a week. Marcus used those 12 hours to do something he'd been putting off for years. He started calling restaurants. High-end places in Des Moines that might pay premium prices for custom-grown, organic heirloom produce. He'd always been too busy to do sales, too busy in the fields. Third restaurant he called, the chef said yes. Wanted 20 pounds of mixed heirloom tomatoes every week, year-round if possible, premium price. One phone call, one client, and suddenly Marcus had a customer paying 3 times what he got at the farmer's market, with guaranteed volume and no standing around time. He hired Jake for 20 hours a week. By month 4, Marcus had 3 restaurant clients and had stopped going to the farmer's market entirely. The income was the same, but he'd freed up another 8 hours. He used that time to develop a community-supported agriculture program, a subscription model where customers paid up front for a season's worth of weekly produce boxes. 40 people signed up the first season, guaranteed revenue paid in advance. For the first time in 11 years, Marcus had predictable cash flow. By month 8, he'd hired 2 full-time workers, and Jake had graduated to a salaried assistant manager position. Marcus had documented everything so thoroughly that he'd created an operations manual, 90 pages of step-by-step processes for literally every task on the farm. He wasn't in the fields anymore unless he wanted to be. He was doing crop planning, client relationships, business development, and strategic growth. The work he was actually good at. The work that actually mattered. By month 12, Marcus implemented Rung 3. He started producing value-added products, small-batch hot sauces and salsas using his heirloom tomatoes. Partnered with a local commercial kitchen, developed 4 recipes, got them into 6 specialty stores in Des Moines. Another revenue stream that didn't require his direct labor for every unit sold. The hot sauce thing started as an experiment. It became 30% of his revenue within 6 months. And here's the thing that broke Marcus's brain. He was working less and earning more, but it wasn't magic. It was just leverage. Every hour he invested in systems, documentation, and delegation created multiple hours of value. His time was finally multiplying instead of just passing. 18 months later, Marcus was working 4 days a week and earning $127,000 a year. Not from working harder, from working differently. He had 7 employees. His operations manual had grown to 200 pages. He'd launched a YouTube channel teaching other small farmers how to systematize their OPA rations that brought in consulting clients willing to pay $200 an hour for his expertise. The farm still required work, but it didn't require all of Marcus's time. He'd stopped being the bottleneck. Sarah cut back to part-time nursing, not because they needed the money anymore, but because she actually loved being a nurse. They took a 2-week vacation, first vacation in 12 years. The farm ran without them. Not perfectly, but it ran. When they got back, Marcus went to find Robert Sullivan, took him to the same coffee shop, bought him coffee this time. "I owe you," Marcus said. Robert smiled. "You don't owe me anything. You did the work. I just showed you the ladder." "Why did you help me?" Marcus asked. "You didn't know me." "Because I was you," Robert said quietly. 30 years ago, I had a small manufacturing business. Worked myself half to death for a decade, barely surviving. Someone showed me the same framework. Took me 2 years to implement it fully, but it changed everything. I sold that business for enough to retire at 50. Been helping people climb ever since. Marcus nodded slowly. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was letting go, trusting other people to do it. That's always the hardest part, Robert agreed. We confuse control with quality, but systems create better quality than heroic effort, every time. Here's what Marcus discovered that changes everything for you right now, regardless of what you do for a living. The reason hard workers stay poor isn't because hard work doesn't matter. It's because they're stuck on rung 1 of the ladder, trading time for money, and time is the one resource you cannot scale. You cannot work more hours than exist in a day. You cannot sustain 16-hour days indefinitely without breaking. And as long as your income requires your direct presence, your direct labor, your constant input, you are capped. There is a ceiling, and that ceiling is usually just above survival. The people who break through aren't working harder than you. They're working differently. They've figured out how to make their time multiply. They've built systems. They've delegated. They've created leverage. And here's what that means practically. If you're an employee stuck at rung 1, climbing to rung 2 might mean developing a skill that commands higher rates than teaching others that skill. It might mean starting a side business that can eventually run without you. It means shifting from being paid for your time to being paid for your results or your systems. If you're a freelancer, rung 2 is building a service that other people can deliver under your brand. It's creating templates, processes, courses that multiply the value of your expertise without multiplying your hours. If you're a small business owner like Marcus was, rung 2 is documentation and delegation. It's admitting that you doing everything yourself isn't dedication. It's a bottleneck. It's investing in people and systems even when it feels financially terrifying because the alternative is staying trapped forever. The shift is mental before it's practical. You have to stop measuring your worth by how exhausted you are. You have to stop believing that doing everything yourself is somehow more noble than building something that works without you. You have to recognize that your time is your most valuable asset, and every hour you spend on low-value tasks is an hour stolen from high-value growth. Marcus's breakthrough wasn't learning to work harder. He'd already mastered that. His breakthrough was learning to work smarter, and that started with recognizing the game he was playing was unwinnable. You cannot climb a ladder you don't know exists. Most people never learn about the leverage ladder. They spend 40 years on rung 1, confused about why they're not advancing despite maximum effort. They retire exhausted and broke, convinced the system is rigged, and they're partly right. The system is designed to keep you on rung 1, trading time for money, because that's where you're most controllable and least powerful. But once you see the ladder, once you understand the mechanics of leverage, you can start climbing. It won't happen overnight. Marcus didn't transform his farm in a week. It took 18 months of consistent, strategic effort. But it happened, and it was permanent. The framework is simple. Identify what only you can do. Systematize everything else. Delegate progressively. Reinvest freed time into higher leverage activities. Repeat. Every time you move up a rung, your time becomes more valuable. An hour on rung 2 generates more value than an hour on rung 1. An hour on rung 3 generates more than rung 2. And by the time you reach rung 4, where your assets work for you, time becomes optional. You work because you want to, not because you have to. That's the difference between hard work that keeps you poor and hard work that builds wealth. It's not the effort, it's where you direct the effort. So here's your challenge, and I mean this with complete sincerity. Stop measuring your worth by how exhausted you are. Exhaustion isn't a virtue, it's a warning sign. If you're working maximum hours for minimum results, you're not in a noble struggle, you're in a broken system. And you can leave that system. Start documenting what you do, all of it, every task, every process, every decision point. Write it down like you're creating a manual for someone else to follow, because eventually someone else will follow it. That's the first step. Then ask yourself, what am I doing that literally anyone could do with basic training? Be honest, be ruthless. Your ego will want to say everything requires your expertise. Your ego is lying. Most of what you do is replicable. Document those tasks first. Next, find one thing, just one, that you can delegate or systematize. Maybe it's hiring a virtual assistant for 3 hours a week. Maybe it's automating a process you've been doing manually. Maybe it's teaching someone else a skill you've been hoarding. Start small. Prove to yourself that the world doesn't collapse when you let go of control. Then use the freed time, and this is critical. Don't use it to rest. Use it to climb. Use it to do the high-value work you never had time for, the business development, the relationship building, the strategic thinking, the creative problem solving, the work that actually multiplies value. Keep doing that. Keep documenting, systematizing, delegating, and climbing. It will feel slow at first. It will feel expensive. It will feel scary. Do it anyway. Because the alternative is spending the next decade exactly where you are right now, working yourself into dust for diminishing returns, wondering why hard work isn't enough. Hard work is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You need leverage. You need systems. You need to climb the ladder. And the ladder is waiting. It's been there the whole time. You just didn't know to look for it. Now you do. Marcus Chen worked 16-hour days for 11 years and stayed poor. Then he worked 4-day weeks and built wealth. Same person, same work ethic, different system. That can be your story too, but only if you start climbing. The ladder is there. Your move